Hello, and today we're going to do a Q&A on Bhagavatam because things have been busy this week and I didn't get the opportunity to cover any new material. There's one question on the board already, and I think I have at least one by email. I'll give it a check. Ronaldo wants to know any updates on humanity from Martanda versus Brahma. There's no official updates, but I think you may notice, I don't know. Actually, I have no official updates. The reason there's a question about it is because in the Martanda story, there was a death and a rebirth, and this is mortality. But we know that humans, according to Bhagavatam, are descendants from Manu, created from Brahma, not Martanda. However, this is what I wanted to say, you have been noticing that people like Swayambhuva Manu, who supposedly are human, have fantastic powers and live for fantastic lifespans, like being a king for 36,000 years, or like ridiculously huge spans of time. So the possibility that I'm considering is the quicker cycles of death may be due to Martanda's experience. Not sure about that. Ronaldo, I'm gonna hold you to on-topic questions. Everybody, you're all going to be held to on-topic questions, which means on the topic of the Bhagavatam. So I think I have one here by email. Let me find out while you guys type in whatever other questions you have now. Here's one. I think there might be more than one then. Here we go. Regarding the idea that we are, quote, fallen souls, you have repeatedly said in the first place that we were never with Bhagavan because we never would have left him otherwise. I get that, but here's where I'm confused. We are with him before every recreation of the universe. He even talks about it through Narada's the citizen allegory. You and I, O noble one, quote, you and I, O noble one, are two swan friends. We rest out in nature without manifesting any nest for thousands of years. When your passion awakes, it is unaware of and uninterested in me. It flows away from me instead, wondering what sort of girls are out there in the great world. My question is, how are we not aware of him? Okay, so this is a very nice question. This is from Rubini. The question is basically, where do we come from? We exist, we live here, we're alive, and where did we come from? And you abstract the question to where does the soul come from, or like where does life force, where does consciousness come from into this world of objects? So one answer from that is that there's some kind of an ideal world that we came from, and we wound up in this non-ideal world because of some kind of a mistake that we made in the ideal world, and we popped into this one, right? This is the basic paradigm for answering this question, kind of regardless of religion. If you're familiar with the Christian concept, which is kind of the Paradise Lost concept, the Adam and Eve concept, even the Lucifer concept itself is on this basic template. Let's take Lucifer, for example. He's like a big shot angel, God's right-hand man, but somehow stuff goes wrong and he gets cast out of heaven. So there's this perfect world and everything is fine, but then somehow something becomes not fine in that perfect world, and then you come out of that world. Or the Adam and Eve story, they're in Eden is this perfect place. Everything is perfect, but then somehow there's something that's not perfect inside this perfect place, which is their curiosity for something else, whatever it is. Never quite understood exactly what it's supposed to be. And because of that imperfection, they leave the perfect world. So as you can tell by the way that I'm telling you the story, it's ludicrous, because if you're telling me that there's a perfect world, and that there's no chance for those people to have imperfections if they're part of that perfect world. So this is not the explanation of where we came from that Vedanta gives. Vedanta actually gives a very stunning explanation of where we came from, which rather hits you over the head with a brick and makes you think about it completely differently. Vedanta says, what do you mean where you came from? You can come from anywhere. This is not... You're here, you're always here. You exist. You're thinking always point A to point B to point C, but that's not how things work. Point A and point B and point C are side effects of our perception. Past, present, future is side effects of are the side effects of perception. They're not drivers of reality. They're sparkles of reality. They're things about reality that you experience. So Vedanta says you didn't come from anywhere. You are. Now, if you are here in a messed up world, what does that mean? That means that's where you have always been here. There's something about you and me that is the basis for why we exist in this type of a reality. It's something about our character. Something which is inherent in our character, which generates this reality that we live in. That's Vedanta's answer. You didn't come from anywhere. But people who come to Vedanta, Vedic studies and everything, after being heavily influenced for their entire life, since their formative years, by the basic Paradise Lost, Garden of Eden mentality, which is not just if you're a Westerner, because the whole world has been globalized now, but especially if you're a Westerner, they can easily miss or misunderstand that answer that Vedanta gives. And they can easily try to import and transpose upon the Vedanta this same kind of framework that we used to be perfect, but now we're not. But we can be perfect again. Just ignoring the question that if you used to be perfect, then how did you ever wind up not perfect? So, regarding the question of where we came from, some people say once upon a time you were in the spiritual world, but then something happened, just like it happened with Lucifer, just like it happened with Adam and Eve, but they don't say that. And here you are now, with your karma and your messed up world, struggling with everything. That's not the Vedic answer. But now, Rubini's question is, but when the whole universe is unmanifest, which happens every, 311 trillion solar years, it is manifest for 311 trillion solar years, and then it is unmanifest, something like that, for the same amount of time. And while it's unmanifest, all of the living things that exist in it are not in it, because it's not existing. So where are they? So they are merged along with the energy of the existence itself within the energetic source of the existence, which is Vishnu. So she's saying, doesn't that mean that we were with Vishnu before we were here? And isn't that and she said the same thing was explained in the allegory with the two swans. You and I all know where the super soul Paramatma told, what was her name again? Vidarbhi told Princess Vidarbhi, you and we're really swans. And we used to live in a lake together. But you didn't know that. We just rested in this lake. We didn't have nests or anything. We didn't do anything. We just rested. And then when you awoke, your passion was not directed towards me. So Rubini is saying, isn't this confusing? But actually, it's not confusing even in the slightest. It's absolutely clarifying. Because what do the two swans do in the lake when they're together? They simply sleep. They rest. They don't have any activities. And as soon as the swan awakes, how is it described as? It's awakened with passion facing away from the swan, from the other swan. So when the souls are not active, as the universe dissolves, the souls are not active. They're sleeping, just like the same 311-year cycle is the same kind of cycle that happens every year with winter, summer, every month with waxing, waning, every day with day, night. It's the same basic cycle, macrocosm, microcosm. And just the same stuff that goes on, like how you sleep or slow down. In the dark halves of all the cycles, same way everything sleeps in the dark half of the universal manifestation when it's not even manifest. So you're not having any active relationship with Vishnu while you are unmanifest in the material world and just merged or submerged within it. You're not having any perception of Vishnu or any active interaction with him. So hopefully that answers your question, Rubini. There is a fundamental, indelible, permanent relationship between the soul and Vishnu. So of course, in that sense, they're together always. But there's no active relationship which then develops some kind of an imperfection and then breaks. So hopefully that's clear. And that was the question. Let's see if we have any other ones. Imadu loop. So a perfect world doesn't include free will? Of course it includes free will. Go ahead, ask your next question. Why would it not include free will? Ronaldo, which nakshatra gods are least presented in the Vedas? None of the, we don't have the full Vedas, so who knows? But I think some of the lesser understood ones are kind of obvious. You should know, right? Once you go through the names, you should know. Like a Jaikapad. Ahir Budnya, but a lot of the times these are just lesser known synonyms for gods who are more well known, like basically a Jaikapad is Shiva, basically Ahir Budnya is Anantashesh. Do we have descriptions of all nakshatra gods' physical appearances? Yes, you do. Should stories about the gods be taken in consideration when interpreting fatal degrees? You're going off topic, but you should, of course, you should understand the gods if you want to understand the nakshatras. So it did go off topic. Imadalup, so free will in a perfect realm only results in more perfection. Very nice. Because I have free will doesn't mean I'm going to kill somebody. Does it? I have free will. I could go find out all of your addresses and go serial kill all of you. Well, that is not on my mind. It's not. I could do that, but it's not that's not likely how my free will is going to work out. Because I'm not that kind of person. In this incarnation, I'm not that kind of person right now. So, right? Doesn't that answer your question? Just because there's the possibility of something doesn't mean that you have to make that choice. Otherwise, you don't have free will. Everybody should commit suicide. Otherwise, there's no such thing as free will, because free will is a possible choice. And if you don't take it, is there no free will? Yeah, there's free will. I could commit suicide, but I don't want to. However, the thing about free will is because there's a possibility for something, the existence of one thing automatically generates its non-existence. So when something exists, by the fact that it exists, it automatically generates the absence of its existence. If something doesn't exist, then it also doesn't have absence of its existence. Let me see if I can give you a real question, a real example of this. So pizza exists, right? That means that you can know right now I don't have any pizza. If pizza didn't exist, you couldn't say right now I don't have any pizza. Or there's no pizza right now. Or there's no pizza. So when a thing exists, then its lack also exists. So since Gyan or Vidya or Prema exists, that means Agyana, Avidya, non-Prema or Kama exists also. It does not mean that you or a person who has Prema or Avidya or something has to have the opposite, but the opposite can be had by someone. So the world of imperfection exists because the world of perfection exists. That is true. But it doesn't mean that a person who is in the world of perfection has to be also a part of the world of imperfection. Inimidaloop says, so Adam and Eve were not good people, or paradise was never lost because it didn't exist. Adam and Eve are just a story. It's an impossible story. Oh, I guess maybe you're asking me about that. How do you resolve that? It's an impossible story. The people who wrote that story weren't thinking very well. That's the problem, isn't it? Either there's something wrong with Adam and Eve. That's what they say, though. That's their resolution. Then they say that there's something wrong with us. The original sin. That's how they... So it didn't actually... But the problem is, what do you mean? If there's something wrong with them, I thought they were creations of God. It was all good, and you had this whole perfect world set up. Bardo asks, what is the origin of will? Will is actually the masculine component of consciousness. So consciousness has masculine and feminine function. Consciousness is the basic substance of reality. And it has outgoing, which is masculine, and incoming, which is feminine nature to it. And that's why everything that exists has this variation between it. Somewhere on a spectrum between outgoing and incoming, or somewhere on a spectrum between male and female. So that's inherent in consciousness itself. So most of the time when you think of consciousness, you only think of the female nature of it, which is perception. But consciousness is equally the male aspect of it, which is perception, but not as a passive reception, but as an active act, the act of perception. And that is what will is. Will is the act of perception, or will is the driving force of the act of perception. So will is an inherent aspect of consciousness. Without it, no perception transpires. If you have follow-up questions, go ahead. Jonathan, if Brahma's inner nature is Krishna, as Shiva's interior nature is Hara, then is Krishna Rajasic? I ask because I'm curious if the Triguna exists in some fashion prior to manifestation. So where did you hear that Brahma's inner nature is Krishna and Shiva's interior nature is Hara? Shiva is Hara. So I'm not sure. That thing, I think you got problems. A lot of times you have problems in your givens, and that's why you come up with these questions that are difficult. As far as the Triguna, then it's Vishnu, Brahma, Shiva as Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. But the second part of your question is something that Samurai Mama used to ask a lot. She could probably answer your question. But I'll just give a quick answer too. The Triguna is, like everything else, a reflection or a permutation or a perversion of how consciousness really is. Consciousness really has these three qualities to it. It's actually Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat, Chit, Ananda manifests or reflects or perverts into Prakriti as Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. But there may be a step or two in between. There's the Shaktis associated with Sat, Chit, and Ananda, which is Sandini, Ladini, and Samvit. So Sandini is Sat's Shakti. This is the Shakti of Sat. In other words, consciousness has these three qualities to it. Sat means it's real. Chit means it's perceptive. It can experience its realness. And Ananda means it's joyful. It enjoys experiencing itself. It enjoys experiencing its realness. This is the true meaning of Sat, Chit, Ananda. Consciousness is Sat. It's a real thing. In addition to that, consciousness has Chit. It can perceive its own reality. And therefore consciousness is the third thing. It's Ananda. It's happy. Because it enjoys perceiving itself. That's the basis. That's the most important formula to understand. That's the generating formula for all of reality. So, Sandini is the facility of Sat. Sandini means the thing which pulls stuff together. So in order for consciousness to facilitate its realness, or its sattva, then it utilizes a function. It utilizes its power called Sandini, the ability to pull things together and solidify things, to make forms. Consciousness has an ability to make itself into something perceivable. That ability is called Sandini, and it's a function of Sat. And then Samvit is the facility of Chit, the ability to know things, to understand things, to perceive well. The ability to generate knowledge, etc., from the perceptions is Samvit. And then the Ananda is a facility for, the Ladini Shakti is the facilitator for the Ananda of consciousness. It facilitates the joy. Ladini is the pleasure giver. So these three fundamental qualities of consciousness itself are basically analog to Prakriti, which is the counterpart of consciousness. And so the Prakriti has these three things analog as the Trigunas, the three qualities. Its three qualities. Sandini is the Tamasa of Prakriti. It's the ability to form things and hold things and make things solid. That's what tamas does. It slows things down and solidifies. And samvit is analog to sattva guna because it facilitates knowledge. And then hladini is analogous to rajas because it facilitates pleasure. Passion facilitates pleasure. So that maybe answers your question, Jonathan, the second half of the question. Inimadalup, is the serpent in Adam and Eve the same entity in the Ashlesha Nakshatra story? Ask what's her name. Ask that lady who constantly says stuff like this. She'll say yes. But the serpent in Adam and Eve story is some uniquely Christian thing. But they have borrowed the kind of universal human mythological archetypes which are founded in the Vedas. So you have dragons, serpents, etc., always being associated to the netherworld. And therefore they associate it with hell, so therefore they associate Satan or their hell figure with somebody who looks like a dragon. But, and then you can go on and you can say, as I'm sure Claire Nakti would do, is, you can talk about the lustiness or whatever of the Adam and Eve. That's the basis of the thing, and Asalacia is very lusty. That's fine. It's fine. You're mixing things, but if it works, it's fine. Follow up to the will question from Bardo. So we are consciousness trapped in perception because we can. Why would you be trapped in perception? Why do you think you're trapped in perception? What is That's like saying you're water trapped in wetness. Wow. I bet you that would sound great if I had a room full of people and I said it in a very nice voice. We are water trapped in our wetness. We are fire trapped in heat. We must, what the hell would they say next? We must let go of our heat and our wetness. Nice. Sounds good. Probably builds a following. Consciousness can't be trapped in perception. Perception is what consciousness is. Just like water is not trapped in wetness. Wetness is what water is. You're coming also with the nihilistic viewpoint. Because you've perceived the world of imperfection, you conclude that perception causes pain. Like a space monkey said. And therefore you assume that to have peace or freedom from pain, you will have no perception. But that's because your imagination is dull. You never dared to imagine that maybe there is fun perception. Maybe there is good perception. Maybe it just requires vidya. Same thing with any problems people are going to have with will or identity or color, form, body, senses. It's all on that same basic nihilistic mistake. That because and it's a very selfish, babyish, childish mistake. That just because you couldn't do it right, you think it can't be done right. Big fat ego. All these people talking so nicely about no ego have biggest, fattest, most oily, greasy egos. Just because your body is sick, just because your perception leads to suffering, just because your love life always causes pain, doesn't mean that love sucks, doesn't mean that existence sucks, doesn't mean that perception sucks. It means you suck. So if you fix that you suck part, then maybe your perception can become awesome. Maybe your physical form, your tangibility can become awesome and not problematic whatsoever. And then maybe you'd stop demanding that the spiritual world doesn't look like a big cloud of fog. Let's see what else we got. So Space Monkey says, so consciousness precedes form not in a linear fashion. It's the same problem again. You're thinking A leads to B leads to C. But that ABC thing is an aspect of perception. It's not inherent to the reality itself. It's a way that we perceive the reality. So consciousness doesn't precede form. Precede means comes before in time. But consciousness is the substrata, the substrate, the foundation or the root or the origin of form. In that sense, it precedes it. Ontologically, Thank you, Sanjukta. This is very interesting. Feminine Buddha. And I don't usually take these questions, but it's just interesting because it triggered something in my own memory. In full devotion or surrender to the divinity, showed me a serpent coming out of my neck at me hissing. You know, I wouldn't be able to show you this even if I could find it. No, I could. Hang on a second. Let me show you this picture. Let me try to find this picture. Origin of Evil Back to Godhead magazine. This, I think, this is one of the first images that I saw when I started. This is it. I found it. This is one of the first images that I saw when I just started as a teenager to hear about Krishna, Hare Krishna, stuff like that. And when I first started investigating it, you might flip out when you see this feminine Buddha. I just put a link to an image in there. Oh no, the links. It's one of those links. Hang on, the link didn't work. Let me link you to the full page then. They do that, they're tricky. They don't want you linking to their material. Where did it go? Alright, let me do the same search again. Origin of Evil Back to Godhead magazine. Boom. Bam. Here, so you use the second link. And where are we? I was on the other browser. Okay. There you go. The snake is the ahankara. Yes, you're right. It's the ego. Then what the whole imagery is expressing is what it has it coming out of her head and biting her neck. It's kind of different from yours. Maybe that's important. The whole thing is our own, and it's actually our own avidya, or lack of understanding of self. It's the lack of understanding of self which causes us to have motivations that don't truly serve the self. They serve a misunderstanding of self. And then those motivations lead to actions which serve a misunderstood self, but not the real self. And then those actions cause reactions which serve the misunderstood self, but disserve the real self. So you have the image of a snake coming from a person and then biting it. All right, what else? Anything else? Billy, give us a question. He who gives the question is blessed. Give us a good one, Dr. Billy. We're counting on you. Super Spaceman 25. I remember you describing the home of Aslesha from your Nakshatra video. You described it as beautiful. Yes, that is called the subterranean heavens. People, this is also the thing. The Nagas, the dragons, yeah. The asuras is another thing that we have when we import the Christian paradigm into the Vedic paradigm, is we tend to think that the demons are ugly, bad dudes But they're just as beautiful as the gods, and they're just okay. They're just as okay as the gods, and the gods have flaws too. It's just that they don't cooperate with the gods. Probably because they just don't like the leader. What's Kanarth? Kanarth is trying to ask something about how you use Raj Yogas in the... Oh, yeah. I thought it was going to be how do I use a Raj Yoga in the D9. All right, Billy, we're waiting on you. We need your question. You know, I know Bhakti Billy, you know that? Of how many of you on this stream can say that you sat in a restaurant together with me? I think this guy did. My friend Bhakti Billy. How are the Pitris described in the Bhagavatam? What do you mean? What's the specific question? What kind of description do you want? There's two or three categories of Pitri. One category of Priti is, this is in the book, 27 stars, 27 gods. One category is the divinities or the gods who are in charge of reincarnation and making sure that whole mechanism works right. So Aryaman, Yama, and so forth. The other, that's the original Pitri. The other Pitri are, the second type is the type who seeds genetics into human society. They seed various genetics, so they're the origins of Gotras, which are genetic lines. So there's also divinities, but of a lower echelon. And then the third type of Pitri is anybody who died. Anybody who died is a Pitri, a forefather, an ancestor. And they may, because reincarnation to Earth is not usually instantaneous. So usually ancestors are accessible as Pitri while they are in Yama's Loka. So I hope that answered your question. I did not expect this question from you, Bhakti Billy. Are the ancestors always involved in our world? Not much. Ancestors are doing their own thing just like everybody else is. Just like your friends don't want to be your friend unless you're doing what they're doing. However, the ancestors are your genes pool, right? So in that sense, they're in you now. So they're acting through you now. Colin, good deal. I can get a question from Colin. What is your view of the part of Bhagavatam when he discusses how doing daily tasks is more penance than doing prayer and not doing them? Do you agree? I don't know what part that is. Could you remind me what part it's from? I don't think it doesn't sound like you got it right. Jonathan Henkel. The first half of my earlier question referenced the end of the fourth canto of the Song of Narada. You are the true actual reality who manifests all sub-realities through your nature as withdrawer. Hara. Yeah, that's his nature. Shiva is Hara. And then it goes on, the maintainer of Vasudeva and the assembler, Krishna. Oh, that was interesting, wasn't it? The assembler, Krishna. Krishna can be a synonym for Brahma sometimes. Vasudeva obviously is a synonym for. Don't forget, you're talking about people who are Rasika, and this is over our heads. But the Bhagavatam is very, very over our heads, and we're just reading it now and pulling out whatever we're pulling out from it. that's relevant to us now, but guarantee you, you can bet the Bhagavatam is extremely advanced spiritual text, and none of us can fully appreciate what is actually going on in there. But one of the things that you should start to consider is that the people who are speaking in the Bhagavatam, the people who are speaking the Bhagavatam are what we call Rasik Bhavakas. So they are extremely emotionally developed on a spiritual platform. And they're highly passionate and highly engaged in strong, intense, passionate emotions towards Bhagavan. And that's why they will tell a story about something that has nothing clearly related with Bhagavan, but the way that they tell the story, the particular words that they choose, the particular things that they highlight, makes everything very relevant to Bhagavan. So when you have this thing here like Narada saying, like Narada, right? He's very Rasik. So he's going to use, instead of saying Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, his personality, he'll say Hara, Vasudev, Krishna. Because his perception of the thing is really deep. And his mood is to highlight the nature of his Ishtadev in each and every little detail. So instead of saying Shiva, he'll say Hara, because Hara is Krishna, is a name for Krishna and Radha. And instead of saying Vishnu, he'll say Vasudev, because Vasudev is the name for Krishna. And instead of saying Brahma, he'll say Krishna, because Krishna is the name for Krishna. Okay? How does a woman know? Inima the Loop asks, how does a woman know she should be more like an apsara than a wife? Not after she's been a wife. Not after she's a wife. Please. Not after you have a kid. And the rest of the question is, how do you know your skin is black? You look at it. How do you know your skin is white? You look at it. How do you know you're a man, not a woman? You look. Like, how do you know if you're a Brahmana or a Vaishya or a Shudra? You look at yourself. How do you know if you should follow Apsara Marg or Patni Marg? You just look at your behavior. You look at yourself. Look in the mirror. Stop trying to. Just maybe it's hard for people to like take off the costumes and look at the self in the mirror, but just you don't have to look at the deep self. Just look at the self, the real self, the physical guy, that the person that's born here right now. You'll be able to tell right away what you are, and therefore what you should do. What you need to do is be honest. These people is constantly like makes me laugh in a kind of worried way. Somebody wants to know if they can tell if they're a Brahmana or a Vaishya or a Shudra from astrology. What are you talking about? Look at yourself. It's like you asking me whether your skin is black or white. You have to ask me if your skin is black or white? The problem is this. What if you had a white person that doesn't want to be a white person? They look in the mirror and they think, it's a little brown today. I think it's getting brown. I think maybe it's getting towards black. I don't know. Let me ask somebody else what they think. That's what the problem is. So when you have a person that looks in the mirror and sees, I don't know, sees a Kshatriya, but wants to be a Brahmana, they just kind of refuse to see the Kshatriya in the mirror. That's the thing. That's what you have to do is stop. Don't come to the mirror with your demands. Just go to the mirror with an open eye, and you'll see everything about who you are. Greetings, Seema. Anything else? Yes. Colin, were you able to find that part what you were talking about? What's your view of the part of the Bhagavatam where he discusses how doing daily tasks is more pronounced than doing prayer and not doing them? I mean, in general, I don't know what part of the Bhagavatam you're talking about, but in general, what this is probably about is it's more trouble to pursue happiness in ignorance than it is to get rid of ignorance. Remember the snake coming out of the head and biting itself? That's the result of pursuing happiness in ignorance. So we just think it's kind of a pain in the ass to get educated spiritually and practice it and realize it and comprehend all this stuff. It's a pain in the neck. I'd rather just play a video game. I want to just have a beer and some pretzels. But the video game, the beer, and the pretzels is going to be more of a pain in the ass to you than the work that it takes to get the ananda of self-knowledge. That's probably what that's about. Yeah, if you find the specific reference to where it was said, it could be about something more specific. Seema, okay, I have a question. How do we get people in Kali to realize they need to focus on their liberation? I stopped trying. How many years ago did I stop trying? I stopped trying when I was 25-ish. So that's about 25 years ago. There's a funny thing, actually. While I was trying to get the people of Kali Yuga to understand the importance of their liberation, I had a problem, which was that how do you do that? How do you have that aspiration? Something is cracked in your head. You're like a person whose house is burning, but you're texting your neighbor with advice about how to decorate the kitchen. Why are you thinking about your neighbor's kitchen when your stove has burning oil going all over the floor? Then, the other interesting thing using the same analogy. So this is what the preaching shit is all about. What is this preaching? What do you have to preach? Your kitchen is burning. You don't have time for that. But the other part of the analogy, which is really interesting, is, hey, if your house doesn't burn down, and you take care of your house and you decorate it, then when your neighbor comes over and knocks on your door for some odd reason, they're going to look inside your house and see your kitchen, which looks awesome. So instead of wasting all of your time texting your neighbor about how to decorate her kitchen, just take care of your kitchen. That's what made sense to me 25 years ago. So I really do not care. I don't care. Same thing with this Bhagavatam stream. I like all of you guys, but I really don't care. Your liberation or your understanding or non-understanding of any of this stuff is none of my business. I'm doing this because I want to have this time to think about the Bhagavatam. I'm taking care of my own kitchen. So that's my recommendation. If you want to get people in Kali Yuga to realize that they need to focus on their liberation, then we should focus on our liberation. Because the only way of truly teaching anybody is through achar. And the only way of really achieving anything is through achar, which is behavior. Not prachar, which is speech. Do you know anybody who's called Paribrajaka Pracharya? Jai Pracharyaji. Pronounce Pracharyaji. Nobody's called Pracharyaji. It would be funny. Everyone, though, however, is respected with the term Acharyaji. So that's the best way to preach, is not to preach. Does Bhagavatam talk about Sankirtan? No, of course. The Bhagavatam is Sankirtan. What, do you have a more specific version of that question? Like some specific idea of Sankirtan? Yes, yes. It's like, if you're happy, don't you want to spread that? No, do you really? Like, when I'm happy, I don't find myself making a plan. Okay, now how can I make my daughter happy? How can I make my wife happy? How can I make my sons happy? As a matter of fact, if I start making that plan, then I lose my happiness. But what generally happens is, if I'm happy, then if they come into the room where I am, or if I go into the room where they are, the happiness spreads by itself. Behavior and speech, but prachar means preaching and achar means behavior. Actually, you shouldn't preach to anybody. If you preach to anybody, you are actually running the great risk of aparatanam. You're running a huge risk. You shouldn't be doing that. Because one of the biggest aparads to Krishna is to instigate ill feelings towards him. So you should never preach. But here I am. Am I preaching? No. I'm doing my thing on YouTube. You guys joined. Good for you. When somebody asks you a question, answer it. When nobody asks you any question, shut your mouth. Don't talk. Don't preach. Don't show even. Mind your own business. Keep to yourself. If somebody comes curious about what you're doing, let them know. You should never answer a question to somebody who hasn't asked a question. This is a big deal. This is a big deal. You'll find books are written with curses in them on people who don't follow the principle. It's all over the place. Let this never be explained. It's in the end of the Gita. Let this never be explained to a person who has no interest in it. Bhakti Billy, does Sankirtan Yagya, such as in Chaitanya Charitamrita, fit within your analogy of a clean kitchen? Yeah, certainly. What are they doing? Which aspect are you asking about? They perform some interesting things. The Sankirtan Yoga, they, for the most part, 80% of Sankirtan was done in private. Highly private. Astonishingly private. And I'm sure you're familiar with stories that if somebody would attend who didn't belong, they would not even be able to continue. They would stop. But Chaitanya also asked Nityananda and others to do public versions of the Sankirtan. Sankirtan is where they're singing about Krishna, basically. So it's a slightly different thing. That's what it's. I see it as analogous to, like, yeah, you do a YouTube stream. Is it preaching? It's not preaching. Like, to me, preaching is like, hey, you, why are you not doing this? Aggressive. So I think if you're thinking, how do I change people, blah, 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 you have an aggressive attitude. I think it's the Sankirtan spirit is, look, we are doing Sankirtan. You want to come and you want to participate? It's open. This is open public Sankirtan right now. You can participate if you want. That's good. That's not running the risk of intruding into people. Seema says it's not our problem if somebody else has a problem. It might be. It's risky. It might be our problem. It very well might be our problem. Believe me. Believe me. I did it for 8 years. I lived with it day in, day out, 24 hours a day for 8 years. It's usually our problem. Kermit says, it's advised in Manusmriti to keep your knowledge secret, and by so doing it increases your thoughts. That's the idea. That's the idea. Of course, if you keep it secret, when somebody asks you for it, that's another problem you have. It's very simple. Ye tam mam prabhajante tams tadaiva bhajamyaham. We should follow that. We should reciprocate with people the way that they approach us. If somebody comes up to you asking for a lollipop, you should give them a lollipop. If somebody comes up to you asking questions, but do you know anything about Krishna and Bhagavatam? Then you should tell them everything you know about Krishna and Bhagavatam. You should, and it's good to let it be known. That's why people would wear different kinds of clothes. In Vedic culture, you could see who knew what and who was about what and who was expert at what by the kind of dot that they put on their head, or the kind of way that they tied their hair, or the kind of color of the clothes, or whatever they wore. It's okay to say, I have this information if you want it. Preaching can be aggressive, or preaching can be beautiful. I'm just saying. I don't know why it's the motive. When I'm drowning and I'm trying to save other people from drowning, you know, Prabhupada, who was the big preacher, I just gave his analogy. That's his analogy. The drowning person trying to save somebody else. I'm just also saying that I've had first-hand experience of what the result of preaching attitude is. I'm not saying that you have this, but in general, people have this attitude. The whole society becomes focused on other people. Nobody learns anything. Nobody gains anything. Nobody gets any true spiritual enlightenment. How do you give people $500 when you have 5 cents in your pocket? You literally have 5 cents in your pocket, let's be honest. Spiritual sense. is your preaching going to be that powerful? If you really want to preach, why don't you do some sadhana? Why don't you clean your own kitchen? The Loop says, I do this with astrology. When people ask me, I talk about it. When they don't, I don't go near it. Yeah, exactly. You should do it with everything. I mean, it's the same way you should behave in general. Like, how obnoxious is a person who walks down the street drawing everybody's attention all the time? It's obnoxious. In Japanese culture, it's especially hated. People are called meiwaku, the eye stealers. You don't like those people. But they like beautiful people. They like attractive people. They like talented people. They like pleasing people. But they don't like meiwaku. Just be careful. Can you further explain how we create our own destinies, please? Like how certain things happen to you, but ultimately you cause it to happen yourself? I don't completely understand this. Sure. And then that maybe will be the last question, unless I get a good one. Sinister, it's very kind of simple. It's a simple it's a simple thing, but it's just when you make it happen a million times, then it becomes complicated. So for example, if I push the microphone away, the sound will get lower. And if I pull the microphone towards me, the sound will get higher. It's a simple thing. That an action has a result. Every action has a result. That's the actual purpose of action, is to generate a result. So it's very simple on paper to see how your action causes your destiny. I practiced, then I did it well, and then people applauded. And they gave me money. Now I'm rich. Because I practiced. It's very simple. The only reason why it's complicated is when you take it into the real world, you have 55 billion people doing 55 billion things at the same time. It's not just one person in a vacuum doing one thing and getting one result. So you're going to have all kinds of... It's going to be more difficult to predict karma than it is to predict the weather. Now we have this super typhoon that we don't know if it's going to come and hit us or not. Because they can't predict. They have all the computers and all the science in the world, but they cannot know for sure which direction it's going to go. Why? Because there's just too many actions causing too many reactions. You don't know how they're going to bounce into each other. And so, because it takes so long, because they're so complicated, this world with the actions and reactions so complicated, it often takes a long time for the world to be able to give you the result of the action you got, because you're connected with all these other people, and they have to have the karma to get that result as well, or to be associated to somebody who gets that result. So now you start getting delayed results from actions. So I don't know if that answers your question, or if it's just talk, but that was what came to mind to explain that. You didn't, the actions and the purpose of the actions and the reactions are to give the living entity the chance to get vidya. The purpose of the imperfect world in the first place is to give the living entity the chance to become perfect. This is the interesting thing. Like, we started out talking about perfect can't become imperfect, but imperfect can become perfect. By some method, by some sadhana, or by some grace or something. So the whole structure of the world is to give the imperfect consciousness the ability to become perfect. So the actions that you perform, they generate an effect, and then you learn what type of actions bring peace and happiness and satisfaction and joy. What type of actions bring strife and stress and pain and suffering. Sometimes you learn by doing them. Sometimes you learn by having things done to you. And the purpose is to modify our behavior by modifying our ambitions, future, to avoid behavior which causes pain and to favor behavior which causes happiness. And eventually, over many, many lifetimes, that basic Pavlovian principle of behavior modification refines and refines and refines and refines till we start understanding this true self and the true cause of happiness. So Sinister is saying, how can bad things happen to innocent people? Because nobody's innocent. Nobody's innocent. Like, let's say if person A kills person B, then that person A is not innocent, are they? So now person A deserves to be killed. So the fact that there's a criminal doing a crime means that there's a person who deserves the crime. But the whole thing goes back to, why did person A do that to person B? Because something is wrong with that person. Something was wrong with that person. There's an imperfection in person A that made them do something harmful to person B and start this whole mess. What is wrong with them? Avidya, they don't understand themselves. And they don't understand how to actually be satisfied and happy and content and peaceful. So the action and reaction is going to help them understand that. So it's not saying that the people who had terrible things happen to them deserved it. So let's celebrate the criminal. It's not saying that. It's saying remotely they deserved it. Immediately it was a horrific thing. And ultimately it's horrific because it's based on ignorance. The factor which is causing people to do things that make them deserve to suffer is the thing that's truly bad. So the concept of understanding karma doesn't kill your compassion. It puts your compassion to the deepest spot. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, guys. I got to the end of the brain strength. And now I'm getting distracted by the weather. So I think I need to go and close some windows and stuff. So thank you very much for keeping me company. My favorite darshan is Bhagavad Darshan.